Long before the world knew our name, before maps were drawn by outsiders, Rwanda was a nation built on a shared spirit. This wasn't something that just appeared overnight. It grew slowly over centuries, rooted in the hills and valleys we call home. Our story begins with kingdoms, with visionary leaders who saw beyond their small villages. They imagined a larger community, a single people united under one purpose. This was the birth of our patriotism, a feeling of belonging that was passed down from one generation to the next, like a treasured family story told around a fire. It was a promise to work together, to protect each other, and to build something lasting. The kings, or Umwami, were central to this vision of a unified Rwanda. They were more than just rulers, they were symbols of our collective strength and ambition. Leaders like Ruganzu Ndoli weren't just conquering lands, they were expanding the idea of what it meant to be Rwandan. They brought different clans and communities into the fold, not just through force but by creating a system where everyone had a place. This expansion was a source of great pride. It showed what we could achieve when we moved as one. Our shared language, Kinyarwanda, became the thread that tied us all together, a constant reminder that despite our different roles, we were all part of the same, beautiful tapestry. Our ancestors understood that a nation is more than just borders on a map. It's a culture, a way of life. They developed unique traditions and social systems that strengthened our bonds. People worked the land and tended their cattle, understanding that their individual efforts contributed to the well-being of the whole community. This was patriotism in action, not loud or boastful but a quiet, steady commitment to the collective good. It was seen in the way neighbors helped each other, in the songs that celebrated our history, and in the respect shown to our elders who carried the wisdom of our past. We were a people proud of our identity, confident in who we were. This early sense of unity was remarkable because it was built from within. It was an organic creation shaped by our environment and our shared experiences. The hills that surround us weren't just geographical features, they were witnesses to our growth and our resilience. They watched as we built a complex society with a strong central leadership and a deep sense of national identity. This foundation was so strong that it would be tested in unimaginable ways in the years to come. But the memory of this original unity would never be completely erased. It remained a powerful idea, a blueprint for the nation we would one day have to rebuild. Then outsiders arrived, and they brought with them new ideas that would profoundly challenge the unity we had so carefully built. The colonial powers, first Germany and then Belgium, saw our society not as a whole, but as a collection of separate parts. They looked at the Hutu, Tutsi, and TWA, who had lived together for centuries, sharing a language and a culture, and decided to put us into rigid boxes. They introduced identity cards that etched these labels onto our very being, making them permanent and divisive. What had once been more fluid social roles were now hardened into unchangeable ethnic categories, sowing the first seeds of mistrust among a people who had long seen themselves as one. This strategy of divide and rule was a powerful tool for control. The colonial administrators favored the Tutsi monarchy, strengthening its power while alienating a large part of the population. This created resentment and poisoned the relationships that had held our society together. The natural harmony of our kingdom was disrupted, replaced by a new and dangerous tension. It was a clever but cruel tactic. By making us suspicious of one another, they made it easier to govern us. The focus shifted from our shared Rwandan identity to the narrow, manufactured differences that they had emphasized. The spirit of collective responsibility began to fray under this external pressure. When Rwanda moved towards independence in the early 1960s, the damage was already done. The transition was not a moment of shared celebration for all, but one marked by violence. The so-called Hutu Revolution of 1959 overthrew the monarchy, but it also unleashed waves of attacks against Tutsi citizens. Thousands were killed, and many more were forced to flee the country of their birth, becoming refugees in neighboring lands. This was a deep wound in our national soul. The unity that had been our strength was now shattered, and the post-independence years were filled with cycles of violence and discrimination, a tragic legacy of the colonial policy of division. The decades that followed independence were a time of great struggle. The promise of freedom was overshadowed by political instability and ethnic persecution. The leaders who came to power often used the politics of division to maintain their control, further deepening the rift in our society. Tutsi who remained in Rwanda faced systemic discrimination, while those in exile dreamed of one day returning to a peaceful and united homeland. This dream of return, of reclaiming a lost sense of belonging, would eventually lead to the formation of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, a movement born out of the pain of exile and the hope for a better future. The early 1990s were a time of escalating fear. The government, led by Hutu extremists, ramped up a terrifying campaign of propaganda. They used radio stations and newspapers to spread hatred, dehumanizing Tutsi citizens by calling them cockroaches and snakes. This constant barrage of hateful language was designed to do one thing: prepare the minds of ordinary people to commit unthinkable acts. Peace talks like the Arusha Accords offered a glimmer of hope for a power-sharing government, but the extremists rejected any form of compromise. They were not interested in peace. They were meticulously planning for a war against their own people, a final, terrible solution. On April 6, 1994, that plan was put into motion. The assassination of President Juvenal Habyarimana was the trigger for the start of the genocide against the Tutsi. Within hours, roadblocks went up and militias like the Interahamwe began a systematic campaign of slaughter. They went from house to house armed with lists of names and fueled by years of hateful propaganda. The world watched in silence as over 1 million people, mostly Tutsi, but also moderate Hutu who opposed the killing, were murdered in just 100 days. It was a uniquely brutal horror, where neighbors turned on neighbors, and the very fabric of our society was torn apart with machetes and clubs. In this moment of absolute despair, when it seemed all hope was lost, one group stood up to fight back. The Rwandan Patriotic Army, the military wing of the RPF, resumed its military campaign with a clear and urgent mission: to stop the genocide and rescue the survivors. These brave men and women, many of whom had grown up in exile, fought their way across the country, battling against the genocidal regime's forces. They were not just fighting for territory, they were fighting for the very soul of Rwanda. For those hiding in churches, swamps, and attics, the sound of the RPA's advance was the sound of hope approaching. The fight was grueling and heroic. The RPA soldiers were liberators, risking their lives to save their fellow Rwandans from certain death. Survivors recall the moment of their rescue as a rebirth, a second chance at life they never thought they would have. The RPA's determination was unwavering. They pushed forward, town by town, hill by hill, driven by the conviction that they had to end the nightmare. Their advance was a race against time, with every day saving thousands of lives. Their courage in the face of such overwhelming darkness represented the very best of the Rwandan spirit of resilience and sacrifice. July 4th, 1994 is a date etched forever in the heart of every Rwandan. On this day, the Rwandan Patriotic Army captured the capital city, Kigali. This victory was the turning point. It signaled the end of the genocide and the beginning of a new era for our nation. We call this day Kwibohora, Liberation Day. It is not just a public holiday. It is our country's second birthday. It marks the moment we were pulled back from the brink of total annihilation and given the chance to rebuild. Liberation Day is a powerful symbol of the triumph of hope over despair, of courage over hatred, and of unity over division. The celebration of Kwibohora each year is a deeply meaningful event. It is a time for us to honor the incredible bravery of the men and women of the RPA who stopped the killing. We remember their sacrifice and express our profound gratitude for their actions. But it is also a day to reflect on the journey we have traveled since those dark times. It is a reminder of our responsibility to build a nation worthy of the lives that were lost and the lives that were saved. On this day, we recommit ourselves to the values of unity, dignity, and self-reliance that now define the new Rwanda. Today, the patriotism that was once fractured is now stronger than ever, but it looks different. It is a conscious choice, a daily commitment made by every citizen to see each other not as Hutu or Tutsi, but simply as Rwandan. This new patriotism is visible everywhere, in our community work projects called Umuganda, where we come together to build schools and clean our streets, and in our refusal to tolerate any form of division. We have learned the hardest lesson a nation can learn, that our unity is our most precious asset, and we must protect it at all costs for a peaceful future. As we look toward the future, we carry the memory of our past not as a burden, but as a guide. The story of our liberation is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It shows that even after the deepest tragedy, it is possible to heal, to reconcile, and to build a peaceful and prosperous country.